Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, a really ridiculously super helpful webinar for SEC executives who don't understand cybersecurity compliance so good. Please forgive us. I will start by saying that we are definitely a cybersecurity firm and not a marketing firm. But we're glad you're here. Glad you're going to spend some time with us this Friday. And let's jump into it. So my name is Brian Hahn. I'm with Tradecraft, and essentially Tradecraft provides corporate intelligence and cybersecurity consulting services to a little over 250 SEC registered firms at this point. Today, we're going to cover essentially anything and everything. This topic is extremely overwhelming when we talk about cybersecurity compliance. I know a lot of our videos and our webinars tend to get into the weeds sometimes on how to do things. So I like to do these webinars where we step back from time to time and just say, hey, this is the larger picture. This is what it means to be an executive in an SEC registered firm and be in charge or at least have some oversight of a cybersecurity program. So that's how we'll frame it today. You'll hear me kind of break it down into, what are the daily, weekly, monthly cybersecurity tasks that you should be doing, compliance-wise and technical-wise. And then I'm just going to share some screenshots from how I do things with my clients, how I organize them, set them up. I've done quite a few of these audits, and I think the process that I generally show through here will fit every firm. I've really never come across a firm where this process doesn't fit. With the idea of being, we need a process in place that we understand, that we can replicate, that we can track, and of course, document compliance-wise. I should have added in that last screen. Of course, this is going to be recorded. I'll distribute it and post it on our YouTube channel, so you'll be able to catch a recording of this if you can't stay for the whole thing, or if you missed it altogether, that will be available. So, what are we doing here, right? Like, what's the overview? Essentially, what we're dealing with and what we're building for is the new SEC cybersecurity regulation known as 20649 that's coming down the pipeline in the months ahead. There's a great little two-pager out there that you kind of see referenced in this screen if you want to dive in and read the quick two-pager from the SEC. The total regulation, I think, is a little over 250 pages, if my memory strikes me correctly. But overall, what we want to think about as we're going through this is, what task are we going to have to perform in order to meet these regulations? And then also think about, does it make sense for you guys to be doing this in-house or outsource it or bringing in talent? I think the answer is a little bit different for each firm depending on what we're looking at. So we're going to break it up into a couple different genres. I try to classify things the best I can for people as we work through this. Again, it's, there's a lot of information here and every firm's a little bit different. But everyone's going to have a policies and procedures manual, and we'll definitely talk about that in more detail today. You got to maintain a business continuity plan around cyber, whatever that means for you. What happens if internet goes down? What happens if an employee loses a cell phone and no longer has 2FA access? So that can be a very small plan to a very large. Tech agreements. I like to see tech agreements between a firm and its employees, so employees understand how and when and why they are allowed to use the technology and the devices that belong to the firm, and of course have the employees sign off on that. Vendor due diligence is an administrative task, and this is a big one, and especially in the latest regulations that we've seen. I don't know how much you kept up with it, but even Congress is stepping into the fight, and Biden now saying they will veto any regulations that come through regarding these new disclosure rules. But part of these new disclosure rules, which again we'll talk about here more in detail, but a part of them are going to require you to disclose any vendors that have also had a breach. And not only that, there even looks to be some language, it might be pointing to third degree. So vendors of your vendors would be required to be disclosed. So vendor due diligence is going to be a big topic in the months ahead and the years ahead. And of course, we have some new regulatory filings coming down. We have some updates to Form ADV Part 2A that we'll talk about, and a new Form ADVC, which we'll talk about. Then there's also the technical tasks that need to be going on internally. That's vulnerability scans, or maybe for some of you, it's penetration test. Quick side note here, one of the major problems I have with the SEC and the language that they use is oftentimes they interchange terms like vulnerability scanning and penetration testing. And if you've ever done these tasks, or if you've ever gotten a quote for these tasks, these are two very, very different things. So for the way we generally break it down for our clients is this. If on your Form ADV, you do not elect that you have custody other than for billing purposes, I don't really call it technical custody, whatever you want. But if you have custody other than for billing, chances are you're going to need a penetration test. If you don't, if you're a financial planner, if you're an RIA that's got all your assets at Schwab or TD Schwab or whatever they're called now, you're probably going to be able to get away with vulnerability scanning at a much reduced price and time commitment, that sort of thing. So something to keep in mind there. Network maps, we like to keep network maps, just literally graphical maps of the way the network is set up. Not only does it help with internal communications and understanding of the cyber environment, but it also helps with the SEC requirements. A lot of times they will request a graphical map. So I'll show you guys some details of how I put that together today. Other technical tasks are going to be, remediation when you do find problems. Who's going to take care of them? Do you have internal use, someone internal that can handle it? Do you need to go to an MSP, a managed service provider? So these are going to be tasks that will be coming up, of course. Employee training, risk threat assessment reports, we'll talk about all that stuff. And of course, user access management. That's a big one. When I do my consultations, this is probably one where I see 90% of the firms fail. They're either not doing something or doing something completely inadequate. This is a big one. You'll definitely see this brought up a lot, and what the SEC requests during documentations, or excuse me, during examinations. So speaking of which, what's I think the question always comes up: what is an SEC cybersecurity exam really like? Generally what we do, even before 20649, this new regulation is coming down the pipeline. I used to collect just the different examination information request lists that the SEC would send to firms before doing an on-site visit, an on-site examination. So these are routine examinations. So I essentially any ones I can get my hands on, and please encourage you to send them if you have some that you can share. It certainly helps the community. But essentially I take the information out of those and compile it down into this document called Securing Compliance, which is available on our homepage, mtradecraft.net. So you can download that. I think it's 6 or 7 pages of just copy and pasted SEC cybersecurity documentation request. This for me is the core of everything that I design for my clients. When I'm working with my clients, and as you guys take charge of your cyber programs, you really have 2 goals. 1, find the vulnerabilities and figure out how to fix them, and 2, build the documentation around it for the SEC. So those are always the 2 goals that we're building towards when we're building these programs. And this is forgive the little Tradecraft logos there. We use this as a sales document, but it's also a good just overview of what does cybersecurity look like for firms. This, of course, is a kind of a graphical, easy to read map. In the real world, I like to build an actual interactive graph like this that goes through, map that goes through and maps out what my network looks like. So for my intranet, you could think about that as your local office. You're going to have workstations, employees there. They're using laptops, desktops, cell phones connected through Wi-Fi. Maybe you have a print server, maybe you have a file server, backups. Every firm's a little bit different. Hopefully you have at that office a firewall in place, some intrusion detection, intrusion protection systems. And now, of course, most firms have remote offices, whether that's employees working from home or additional offices outside of the main one. So when we're going through and we're working with these, ultimately the goal is to build this map, understand what the network looks like. And then where we see these like configuration audit tags, what we're essentially doing is deploying equipment to actually test these configurations and see if they fit our model, our threat model, they're configured correctly, and they're configured securely. So I'll talk a little bit more about how we actually build a real world map like this for firms. Jumping ahead there, right? So, for those that aren't good at math here, if you haven't figured it out yet, the math really checks out here. 20649 equals NERB job security for a long time to come. There's going to be a lot of technical issues that firms are going to have to get on top of and build into their operations that they may or may not have done previously. So cybersecurity compliance is definitely death by a thousand paper cuts, right? We're going to think about kind of two different sources of paperwork. We're going to have our regulatory filings that need to be kept up. That's the form ADVC, and again, the updates to the form part ADV2A. Internally, we're going to have the policies and procedures manual that needs to be updated and maintained, proper cyber record keeping, so logs, reports, audits, scans, all these different things we're doing as part of our monitoring process. We need to have a repository where we can store these and access these. I'll show you guys some shortcuts to that here in a minute. We talked about the employee technology usage agreement. There's employee cybersecurity awareness training that needs to be kept up. And I'll show you guys an easy way to do that. We talked about user access rights and vendor due diligence. But for me, I also like to have just a searchable, reportable repository of the different logs and how they're mapped together. And just so, for one, again, we can be together as a team as we work through these. And two, it makes it super easy to organize and build our compliance documentation for an audit. So let's talk about the policies and procedures manual. This is going to be a big one. This is going to be one of the first documents that the SEC looks at, because ultimately their test is, for one, are these policies and procedures adequate? And two, are you following them? So this is always going to be a great place to start. Internally, kind of depending on where you're at, sometimes, it just makes sense to completely trash what you have and start over once you've built out a lot of these other technical documents that we'll talk about, especially given that 20649 is actually mentions topics that are going to be mandatory now. So doing written risk threat assessments, internal, external vendors. For us, we call this the CRVT report, the Cyber Risk Vulnerability and Threat Report. It's essentially a report that shows people what your firm looks like to a hacker, right? Like, what is your risk? What is your threat? What's actually out there? Inside that policies and procedures manual, you also need to address how you are handling individual employee security and user access rights, okay? Bring your own devices is a big one that is going to be an issue in the years to come. You cannot allow your employees to bring their own devices and access firm emails and things like that without having the ability to remotely wipe that employee's phone and remove all their credentials. And in very few firms who have bring your own devices have that sort of policy in place. You're going to have to get one, and we're going to have to outline it in the policies and procedures manual. So a lot of firms, I'll tell you, are moving to hey, look, we're not going to allow employees to use personal cell phones for network access, or domain access, or email access. User access rights, again, this is going to be another one. Not only is it what do users have access to, right? So trading shouldn't have access to accounting, and accountants shouldn't have access to trading platform. But also, can you remove those rights if you need to? If we have an employee that goes rogue or dies or doesn't show up for work or whatever the strange situation may be, how can we manage those user access rights and make sure that they're removed? And dealt with appropriately. So information protection protocols and procedures, right? So, we know we have data, we have personal data that we have to protect. We take that data and unfortunately many firms just scatter it across a lot of different fintech solutions. This is where you're going to have to outline why you've decided, that you're going to put your sensitive data into a vendor and what you're going to do to protect it there, right? So, okay, we've chosen to use Redtail. We are going to upload our client into Redtail, and then you write, despite Redtail's past security lapses, we think that, going forward, information secured. This is how we're going to do our part to protect it. This is how we're going to do our vendor due diligence to monitor Redtail or whoever the fintech provider may be. This all has to be outlined in the policies and procedures manual. Also, your cybersecurity and threat vulnerability management. We'll talk about this in more detail, but when you're scanning your environment, if you do find a vulnerability, how are you documenting it and how are you working through it? And of course, what's your response and recovery game plan? I can tell you right now, nation state attacks are on the rise. It's a major problem. We're going to have a guest speaker here. Actually, it's at the end of February. D. Smith from SIG Intelligence is going to join us, and we'll be talking a lot about this, about the rise of nation states. I actually dealt with my first nation state case not too long ago. It was pretty cool to work, but artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and these nation states attacks are getting real. And they're going after even the smallest of firms because it's low hanging fruit. And for a country like North Korea, it does make a difference when they can get away with $150,000 or $200,000. That's a big difference to them, especially if they can do it over and over. So again, our response and recovery game plan, it has to go beyond what we were calling like the Katrina response. Like everyone thought Katrina was a wake up because all these firms in Houston and Louisiana and even up into Birmingham and Mississippi, I think some in Atlanta, went without power for weeks, right? And they, things were dying, cell phones were dying, people couldn't get in contact with anyone. So we have to start thinking beyond that and also go to nation state attacks, right? What happens if you wake up and $700,000 is missing from client accounts and it's disappeared in a third party that you didn't authorize? What's your game plan for that? And then employee security training, of course. So I like to share this slide just to get a little more granular on the policies and procedures because it is overwhelming. There's a lot of topics that have to be dealt in here, and so or dealt with in this document. So I think it takes sense. It makes sense to take a few minutes and talk about how to organize this document. What you're seeing right now is the typical table of contents that I would start with when building one from scratch from a firm. What you'll see is the different exhibits. The way I build this document is, so, for instance, let's start with that first one, inventory of devices. What I'm going to put in my document is just an overview of my program. Okay, so whatever that, every Monday, we're going to log in, we're going to use such and such program to scan the network, update the inventory of devices, and that report will be saved as Exhibit XX. So I always make my policies and procedures document static, and I have it pointing to exhibits that are dynamic so that my workflow then becomes when I'm going and I'm doing these exhibits, when I'm building these different add-ons, it's easy for me just to build one report and then tuck it into that folder and not have to start spider webbing around all throughout this document, making sure that everything is updated. I know you CCOs know exactly what I'm talking about in just keeping your document manageable. This is how I set it up. Again, static document, dynamic exhibits, and I'll show you how I build those dynamic exhibits here. The employee cybersecurity awareness training. So this is going to be a big one. There's a ton of different ways you can do this. Some firms just do a quick hourly overview at the end of the year. That's totally fine. We have a product called Fieldcraft, which we think is pretty excellent. Uses real humans and slightly humorous videos demonstrating, they're about 2 minutes long, demonstrating different cybersecurity awareness topics. I think we're a little over 110 topics now totally covered there. But if you don't have a program, reach out, let me know. I'll set you up with a free demo of this product and give you guys a discount on it. But it takes about 15 minutes to deploy, and it manages your entire training throughout the year. So something to think about. Again, we'll give you a full demo just so you can play with it and see if it's something you like. But that's a super easy solution to the training if you don't have one in place. So let's talk about the proposed updates to Form Part 2A, and what we're starting to see in this kind of initial regulation. I encourage you all, please, take a look at the YouTube channel and the different videos that we have posted up there. One that was probably done 8 or 9 months ago was titled something to the effect of the new regulation only benefits hackers and spies. If you've been through an audit with us, you know exactly what that means. So my first report in pretty much any audit that I'm doing with the client is that CRVT report, where we're taking a look at what your firm looks like to a hacker. And when we build that report, we're not using any privileged information. I'm not accessing any systems that I shouldn't. I'm simply using Google and other public databases to build a target and what that target looks like. So with our new regulation, Part 2A, the updates to Part 2A, which is going to be a narrative description of your cyber program, an overview of your perceived threats and any past cyber events. You're going to outline that in your disclosure to clients and prospects now, in that Part 2A. And this is noteworthy. This is the second stupidest thing the SEC has ever done, has required this. This is the second stupidest thing by far. So we have that to deal with, right? And so now in my CRVT reports, and when hackers are doing research on the firms, they're going to have a target written description of a cybersecurity program. They're literally going to know what defenses are in place and how to get past that. You know how important this is if you've seen the hacking demos we've done where we're phishing people, right? If I know what systems you're running on your computer and what defenses, it's super easy for me to build an attack that gets through that. So not a fan of Part 2A. Now let's talk about Form ADVC, the mandatory incident reporting. This must be filed within 48 hours of incident. And this one's a big one. This one's going up the channels. Congress has stepped in on this, has said things to the effect that they were going to put legislation in place that would pretty much get rid of the SEC's disclosure requirement. And then the Biden administration fired back and said, well, we would veto any regulation. So it has reached the top, this mandatory incident reporting. Excuse me. I'm not a fan. Again, same effect. We, in any Form ADVC, you're going to be describing how you were attacked successfully. So now as an attacker or as someone doing my job, I can go and pull this data and see exactly how you're going to react in the event of an attack. Did you stop this first attack? Great. Well, now I know how you stopped it and I'm going to move past that. This information, in my opinion, provides no value to investors, to clients, or to prospects. I think they should certainly have insight and should certainly be privy to your cybersecurity practices, or at least knowing that they're up to standard. Or even if we had to file this information privately with the SEC, I would probably even be okay with that. But if you guys don't know, everything you file with the SEC is just immediately pushed out the back in terms of this Freedom of Information Act and in data disclosure acts that the SEC is under. So everything you can submit to them can be easily downloaded. So Form ADVC is going to be a problem. Essentially, they're saying all instances that affect operations or the confidentiality of data or the security of client assets, or any assets for that matter, should be reported on Form ADVC. So the colorblind test here is what I call the technical docs task list. I've covered it in detail in other webinars, but I essentially use two programs to design an entire cyber compliance program. One is Nessus, Nessus. I apologize. I probably should have had a graphic up here in the slide. And the other one is Maltego, Maltego. I use Nessus to do things like run vulnerability scans, configuration audits, build network maps, do patch management, do my threat and vulnerability management. And then I use Maltego to organize all of that information into a graph that looks like this, or an interactive map that clients can use to fully understand their cyber program, organize that documentation. And so, if you think of this as being like an actual, what's the word? Like a mind map, a brain map, where you can like zoom in and see different details. That's exactly what you're looking at here. So each little dot would represent a different piece of information, whether that be a person, a machine, a system, a piece of software, a building. We can pretty much outline everything in this map. So let's take a look at what it kind of looks like when we zoom in a little bit here. For instance, here is just a very simple way that we use Maltego to build the written cyber risk vulnerability and threat report, that CRVT report. And what you're seeing right here would just be a very small part of that. But one of the things we want to know is if we take if we take John Smith or John Doe in the example here in your firm, if we take John Doe and we want to know where has John lost information in the past, right? Like what services has he signed up for? What vendors has he signed up for that have experienced a breach? And then when we go and we look at those breaches, what information can we recover about John Doe? Because this is a threat. If a hacker looks at these same databases, these open source databases that we're pulling from, you can see down below, the way we kind of map this out is up at the top, you have the email address. That second line of interconnected globes there are going to be the different breaches where we found John's information. And then you can see the little call out gives a quick description of that breach and what happened. And then down below that is all the information that I was able to collect about John. So social security number, his driver's license, date of birth, email addresses, usernames, passwords, IP addresses, partial credit card data. We can often get credit reports that have been published out there. This is all information that a hacker is going to use to build a profile of John and to understand how to attack your firm. If I can collect passwords, it's kind of hard to see here with the graph, but it looks like I've got passwords from about 7 or 8 different breaches for John. And if I see that his password is password 123 in all of these breaches, and maybe there's a small iteration, maybe sometimes it has a capital P, maybe sometimes it has an exclamation point. But anyway, now I can start to see all these iterations of passwords that John uses, and I can start to build intelligence about how does John build a password and how does he access a system. So all this is critical information that we want to know. And the SEC wants to see that you're collecting just so you guys can understand where your threats lie. Here's another quick kind of sample of how I also use Maltego, because user access management, again, that's going to be a big part of this. So for here, we take our fictitious company, Vela Ford. In the larger graph here, we would have velaford.com and securevelaford.com as our domains, our sample domains here. Securevelaford.com being where John Doe, our employee, is going to have admin access to company credentials. And this is a very basic setup. But you understand a lot of people are going to say, hey, this is a red tail or whatever this Secure Vela Ford represents for you. And then below John, we can map his cell phone number and his email address and start to keep good HR records or good, let's call them HR IT records on John and his user access rights. So we can start to map out all of our different systems and how John has access to those systems. Doing in this manner, for one, it gives us a graphical map. If John quits or is terminated, we can quickly see what systems we need to shut down access to, simply by jumping into Maltego and running a PDF report there, which again, we've shown in other webinars. I'm not trying to get too granular on this one, but we've definitely demonstrated that in some other webinars if you want to dive in and learn more about that. But ultimately, it's really proven to be a great way to organize that information and organize the user access rights. Here's another example, too, of how we would use Maltego just to map a network. Okay, so again, very quick example here of the Dunder Mifflin branch in Scranton. We're looking at just 2 individual IPs on this network. Of course, there would be many more with all the individuals there. We're looking at one that is located at pam.dundermifflin.local and another one that is located at scanner.dundermifflin.local, which we can see those mapped here. And then within Maltego, you can also see that we have a vulnerability mapped to Pam's computer. So if you were to click on this vulnerability, it would actually take you to a screen that brought up a lot of this information in a more detailed box and allows me to communicate with whoever I need to communicate with on this particular vulnerability. And we can also clearly map out how it affects the network. So, when I build these maps, again, we're showing evidence here that we're doing patch management. We're actually scanning systems, showing that everything's up to date. And then if we do find a vulnerability, we can quickly show, hey, we're on top of it. We've assigned we understand what systems are affected, and we've assigned a responsible party. Again, just the best way I found to organize this information within a firm and to keep everyone on the same page is to do so in a program like Maltego or some other kind of central program. Here's another kind of quick example. If we dove into that secure.velaford.com, which would be the secure portal that we're using for employee access. Here you can quickly see I've mapped the different systems that are running on that portal. Again, if we had vulnerabilities, we could map it here. This is also super helpful. I always give the example of, like for instance, when Log4j, the JavaScript vulnerability came out, a lot of people, including myself, I'm not a JavaScript guy, went like, what is that? Like, I have no idea what that is. Especially for me, I monitor a lot of systems. So it's super easy for me to have a graph like this because I can quickly pull this up, hit Control F for find, and type in that particular system, Java or Log4j, and quickly get an actual graphical view of where does this potential vulnerability lie in my system. So it's super helpful, even if you're not a technical person, when you have a map like this, just to jump in and say, okay, do I have Adobe software anywhere, right? Or do I have JavaScript deployed? So, it does provide pretty interesting clarity into those kinds of questions. Internal vulnerability management. So, what you were seeing ultimately in those Maltego graphs and those dots are the end results of when we find vulnerabilities. But as we work through systems, of course, we want to keep monitoring and constantly rescanning systems. Again, I use a program called Nessus. The unfortunate thing about Nessus is it's about $5,000 a year. It's incredibly expensive. It's extremely versatile. I will say, and I pay full retail for Nessus. This isn't a sales pitch for them. I've experienced a lot of different vulnerability scanners, and Nessus, for me, has been by far the best value. It's actually one of the least expensive at $5,000, but it's been one of the best values in terms of I can pretty much take Nessus and plug it into any system, email servers, cloud systems, mobile devices, anything you can think about. Nessus is pretty much at the front of to get those taken care of. And again, $5,000 a year is pretty expensive. I think that's where people generally hire us because the economics are less expensive in the first year and certainly in follow-up years when we're doing the audit. But for firms that want to do this internally, Nessus is going to be your best source of software. So whether you're having us build this graph or you're building it yourself, this is the type of vulnerability management system I like to have in place, just so I can see, if you look over on the left, the different systems or the different, different systems on our network, and then the different vulnerabilities that we're dealing with per those systems. So, these darks can be unpatched or remote code execution, whatever we need to work on. And same for cloud service auditing and monitoring. A lot of people think, hey, we put our data in the cloud, we're good, we're secure to go. That is the furthest thing from the truth. When you tell a cybersecurity expert or an IT guy that you put all your most sensitive data in the cloud, what you're really telling them is, hey, I just uploaded all this sensitive data to a computer that I don't own, I can't monitor, I don't even know where it's located, and I have no control over it. And I'm sharing it with 4,000 other people. That's what you're telling an IT person. So cloud security is a big, big issue. Moving to the cloud does not make things easy security wise at all. For instance, if you have Azure or AWS, what we need to be doing is measuring it against known benchmarks. So, here you can see kind of the results of one of those tests where we took an Amazon AWS deployment, measured it against a known benchmark, and what you find is you start to see where whoever deployed it missed multi-factor authentication, or they didn't properly secure some data, or they didn't set up an alarm for when that data is accessed and it shouldn't. So cloud definitely adds its own, difficulties. Really, I mean, it's a whole different audit when you introduce clouds into a firm. So anyway, it's just to say, moving everything to the cloud doesn't remove this kind of responsibility from you. You can't say, oh, we moved everything to the cloud, we don't have any cybersecurity issues. That is certainly not the case. You've actually complicated things significantly by moving to the cloud. And then we'll end here with record keeping, right? So 20649 is going to require record keeping for 5 years. Below, you can see the different documents that are mandatory that are kept. Of course, I say keep everything, right? We know we're going to have these policies in place. And again, just rounding it out for Maltego. And again, I have no affiliation with Maltego. I pay full retail for the product. It just works. It gets the job done. In terms of record keeping, Maltego makes things very, very simple, right? So, if I put my policies and procedures in Maltego, I can just save instances of my Maltego file where it's organized all my cybersecurity. So, here's, January 2024, December 2023, whatever that looks like for you, monthly, just going in and clicking save makes a full backup of this program and record keeping, that sort of thing. And I can tell you the clients who've deployed Maltego generally deploy it further beyond cybersecurity, whether it's helping, maintain their compliance folders and things like that. But definitely something to check out if you're just getting started with this and it's overwhelming. That's a good way to put it together. And it is overwhelming. I mean, there is a lot to this regulation, and I say that coming, the first 12, 13 years of my career, I was on the operations and compliance side of one extremely large hedge fund and many mid-size hedge funds and RIAs, and no one I was with was doing anything like this. I mean, at the large level, yeah, but none of the smaller firms, which were at the time I thought superbly run, were doing things of this nature. And even the clients I get now, which are superbly run funds and have incredible IT infrastructure, a lot of them are missing on this stuff. So it's a big deal. It's coming down, and it's going to be a lot to take in. And again, guys, just thank you very much for attending. If you want to check out any other videos, you can check out our YouTube channel. I think if you just go on YouTube and search Tradecraft, you can jump right to it. And any of our emails will generally have a login link as well. But definitely check that out if there's any topics here that you want to dive in more on, in terms of, what does the SEC actually require, or how do we produce a very specific piece of documentation. I tend to cover that in there. So again, I really appreciate you taking some time to spend with us here on Friday. I tried to keep this to 30 minutes and hold you guys in. So I do appreciate you guys letting me run over a little bit here, as I tend to get long-winded. But I stand by. If you have any questions, please reach out. I'm certainly happy to chat and answer any questions you may have, or show you some examples of how I organize and solve these different problems. So again, guys, thanks for attending, and look for this recording to be passed around soon. And also keep an eye out for that webinar we have coming up with D. Smith from SIG Intelligence. It's going to be really interesting. D is one of the true polymaths in the world. I mean, he's just incredibly engaging on a number of different topics. So I feel pretty lucky to have him coming on to a webinar, and I hope you guys enjoyed as well. So thanks again, and I hope everyone enjoys their weekend.